Hello.
Oh,
Hi, Luft. Can you hear me okay?
yes,
All right. How's it going?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. All right. Let me just see. All right. All right. How's your semester going?
Going well so far. It's still early, but it's nice to have new courses.
All right. Let me just let's see if I can make something here about the level of this. Coming across pretty quietly. Let me just check in a second if I like. Let's see if I can get a little bit louder here. Okay. Can you try to say something?
Yes.
Oh, that's much better. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Contemporary Two, Contemporary One. Sorry, not two. And I'm kind of a. It was a. So I have to apologize. I'm usually more responsive on the website, but this week with, as you probably are too, right? So this is a difficult week for instructors because we are finished upgrading the past semester and still catching up on the new class. So it's a little bit of a difficult over crossing of things, and and so it's plus it was Easter last weekend, so it was also kind of difficult. Anyway, so but I'm happy to see you, and I love to talk a little bit about the course in general, and maybe I can find a better spot that is less sunny. Let me see if I can. It's really bugging me now. Okay, that's better. All right. So, yeah, anyway, so tell me a little bit about. So, I was looking up the meet and greet before. I think you're in Chicago, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in the Chicago area.
All right. And what do you do? What takes you in to the Berkeley Line class? And, what is your, I'm assuming it's not your first class for Berkeley Line, right?
Yeah, no, it's not my first class.
Okay.
Your question was what brought me to the online classes in general, or this one?
Yeah, generally, what is your composition or interest to speak, and
Yeah. Um, I'm in the program, the bachelor program for composition for film, TV, and
film?
game.
Yes, yes.
And that was actually before the general composition major was even present, so that wasn't an option yet. I've been with Berkeley Online for 2 years,
Okay.
and I actually work as a psychologist. I've always
Oh,
enjoyed music, so it was just a desire to reconnect with that aspect of myself. I've taken music classes growing up and such, but I felt like I want to have more time.
okay. But you are in the film comp class, right?
Yes, film
Okay.
composition major.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. All right, all right. All right, cool. So, nice. And sorry, what instrument do you play?
I play the guitar and
Okay.
I'm self-taught with the keyboard, but yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. And so, do you still work as a psychologist or?
Yeah, actually, that's
Okay.
still my full-time work. So this has just been
Okay.
an add-on and gradually
Yeah.
seeing how it feels. I mean, I'm getting more excited with it with time. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure what I'll do, but yeah.
Yeah, this is interesting. I have a, it's this is what I love about the Berkeley Line classes. It's the kind of students that we get is so much different, and there's a lot of more adults, and I really, enjoy this kind of, it's nice change with the college kids, you know what I mean? So, nothing against the college kids. I love college kids. It's just different. It's a different, it's a nice change. So anyway, so, all right, very good. So let me just, maybe what I'll do, I'll give you a brief overview of the class in general, and talk a little bit about, uh, you know, um, if you are taking, I don't know, let me see if someone else speaks. Sometimes so there might be someone. There's a couple more people online, so maybe they're going to be joined soon. But let's just start with some basic kind of points. So. If you are a degree student, you have taken the theory comp 1 through 4, I guess.
Yes.
So I should start off by saying this class is very different than that, right? In the sense that I've been teaching those classes as well for a little bit, and there's a substantial philosophy difference, in the sense that those classes are really kind of, here is the material, here's the guideline, and here's the assignment, meaning like, so lessons are very long. There's a lot of material in the class, and you are going through all of that, and then your assignment is usually, on average, very specific, use this BPM, this instrumentation, this is what you need to have, this kind of things, right? So the assignment there are meant to be, um, prescriptive in the sense of really trying to have you reinforce the topics of the week, so to speak, right? This class is the same, but it's a little bit different in the sense that the idea of the week is not that you touch on all different aspects. It's kind of looking at this as sort of a more kind of expand somewhat the horizon about the music that you know and you listen to. So it's more on the experimental side, it's more on the open side. So for every week, the assignment is not do an exercise that covers all this, the jumps through all these hoops, but it's more like, here's the material, pick something that allows you to write a piece of music that is something that you would like to write and it's personal, right? So that's kind of a little bit of difference, right? So, it's impossible to write, technically it's not impossible, but, let's say it's difficult to be able to write an amazing piece of music every week, but I would want that over the semester you kind of get into this kind of way of thinking about it that is not, so it's really meant to amplify your personal voice, right? So, if you find that one topic that you feel would be useful for you, you like to explore more, and it's closer to your heart in terms of like what you like about music and stuff like that, or there's this composer you didn't know that you found out about you particularly like, that is all good stuff for you to take advantage of. And so in an ideal world, that would be something that you can really work with. Does it make sense? It's kind of a broader kind of a broader sense. Sorry, I'm in a public space right now, so I can make sure this is not weird. Anyway, so that's kind of the general gist of the course. All right, does it make sense? No?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So and so the other piece that is actually so in a way every week we talk about different topics, and you're welcome to explore one or as many as you want, right? So one or many, as part of your own personal exploration. Okay. So the other piece that I want to say is that the class is actually so I'm going to give a brief review of the syllabus, but the other thing is that in the semester, at the end of the final project, we actually write for a piece. So there's going to be the option for you to have players read your music. We have a final reading session. So the last class so there's a given instrumentation for the final project, but I usually work with the performer to do usually the first class is usually a piano duo, so piano and another instrument. Usually it's piano and violin, but maybe we'll do piano and something else this semester, we'll see. And it's really meant to be just, kind of it's an optional thing. It's not part of the grade. It's just more like for fun if you want to hear the piece. Usually there's a little bit of less days to do it because I have to do it during the weekday, but in any case, I'm gonna mention that later on, but this is also gonna happen. I just got a confirmation yesterday that it's going to be confirmed this year. It's going to be happen again this year. But just to give a little bit of a general. So that's another thing that is going to happen. So and the reason for that is actually both contemporary classes 1 and 2, the kind of music that you do, the kind of music that you're exposed to, that you're asked to experiment with and stuff like that, the angle for the wind instrument, it's kind of a more rare, and so it's something that sometimes the mock-ups don't really. They're getting better, but they're not as good as the real thing. And so it's something else that I want you to be aware of for general thing about the class. Okay, so do you have any questions so far?
No.
All right. So if you have any questions, let me know. Okay, but I'm kind of and so anyway, sorry. All right, cool. So let me just give a brief overview about the course. All right. So you can get a sense of where we are, and let me share the screen here. All right, so I'm gonna try to schedule a more fixed time for live classes in general. I like to try to keep them, if possible, the same day of the week, just to facilitate participation. It's probably not going to be on Fridays. I need to look at, so there was a poll that was sent out a while ago, so please, if you haven't done it yet, just do it. I'm going to try to honor that in the sense that if I have a number of students who say they can make it, I'm going to try to make it. If no time is available for everybody, going to try to, kind of maybe alternate two dates in a way that it can make more sense. But in any case, we'll talk more about that later. So this is just to give a little bit of the gist. So the class is I have not written this class. I did write Contemporary Nick 2, but this is stuff I teach all the time in my department, and I've been teaching this class specifically for probably 8 years at this point, and so I feel like I've wrote this class as well to some extent. So in any case, the class is structured in units. So the idea, broadly speaking, Contemporary Technique 2 talks about music that is written between 1945 and the 2000. Contemporary Technique 1, it's difficult because contemporary has become in music this term that is not chronological temporary. It's become more stylistic. It's its definition that very much specifically refers to the 20th century music. And so we talk about music that has been composed between the early 20th century and until up World War II. So this is not exactly contemporary. It's almost 100 years old now, but it's a terminology that's we're coming across, and I think it still makes sense to some extent in certain circles. So it makes sense to have it, but it's kind of a really music of the 20th century, so to speak, right? So then maybe that's a better way to put it together, right? So as I was saying, the class is structured in units. So the first half of the class really deals with pitch, right? And so you have the first three classes, which are basically looking into new scales, new modes, interval structure, which is like a way to compose, music, specific melody in this case, without recurring to functional harmony, right? So in a way, the traditional functional harmony that you have encountered in a lot of the theory and comp classes in general, a lot of the 20th century music was trying to shy away from it as a way to try to write something that was new and fresh, because at the end of the day, that's pretty much what this is about, right? So the first three lessons are about pitch in terms of melody. Lesson number 4, 5, and 6 is non-tertiary harmony, harmony by fourth, harmony by second, and then harmonic motion in the context of what is it called. So we're going to look into this last few classes, lesson 4 to 6. We're going to look at what is it called, atonal music a little bit, music that was developed in the 20th century as a way, again, to move away from traditional harmony, so to speak, And so with lesson 6, we're going to have a kind of a longer assignment. With lesson 6, we're going to wrap up things about pitch. And so I usually say that if you want, this course is a little bit like going on a trip, or maybe I don't know. I've never been on a cruise, but sometimes cruise stop in a place, and sometimes you don't. You just keep it looking for the sightseeing, right? So let's say you go to the Amalfi Coast and you see a bunch of towns from the coast, and then you land and you get off board in one town and spend more time in it, and then you just move back and then again do some sightseeing, right? So if you want, the first 6 classes when it comes to pitch is when you get off board and you just start walking around the city, so you spend quite a lot of time about pitch. Lesson 7 and 12 is definitely sightseeing. In Boston we have this called the duck tours, when they drive you around Boston and show you places in Boston. It's a little bit like that, So in a way, we walk through a bunch of different musical parameters, which is not pitch, but the pace is way faster, So lesson 7 is about rhythm. Lesson 8 is about form. Lesson 9 is also about form and other things, about chance music, really. So it's somewhat related to form. Lesson 10 and 11 and 12 too is about timbre, right? So it becomes a much faster paced class because we don't really go as deep as they with pitch with the second class, with the last part of the class, right? And so in a way, you will be finding yourself experimenting a lot more with certain things, but you also, I just want to be aware that you will not have the chance to go deep as you did with pitch, because we are much pacer. We still very much, our music is, Western music, it's still very much based on pitch as the primary parameter, right? And so in a way, this class reflects that a little bit, But this is just a little bit the overall sense of the class, all right? Any questions so far? All right, cool. So, all right, and so this is pretty much the general overview of the class. Every week you will ask to submit 2 things. One is going to be a PDF of a score, and the second part would be, an audio, which could be, the first few weeks you're welcome to kind of sing, perform your music as well. So the class does spend some time suggesting not using a mock-up. However, I'm aware of the fact that this is not always easy to do, and so a mock-up would be completely acceptable, as an option. And it doesn't have to be fancy, because for me, which is another thing that I think is important, is like, it's not really about the mock-up. It's really about, this is not a production class, so the grade and everything is not about the way you produce your music. It's the composition class. So even just a finale, or whatever you use, play through, export would be fine with me, because again, the goal is to, so the document that for me is the most important one for submission is the score. You'll be hearing me a little bit talking about kind of a broken record, notation, dynamics, stuff like that are important. So I will be giving you feedback based on through that lens too, right? So I find myself quite often saying, cool piece, but maybe, because I think in a way, I also want to try to break a little bit the mock-up kind of approach, in the sense that mock-up are great. Mock-ups are great. They're super helpful. They help you to build a career when you start. It's a great way to get your music sounding good. This is all good stuff to learn. But at the end of the day, music is, there's a performer. This class is really meant for you to try to experiment with music that is meant to be played by players, right? So ideally, which is also why we have these readings, because our goal was to say we can't really ask students to think about having a player, but then don't even have them offering the opportunity to have an experience of working with players, right? So that's kind of where we are, and that's why we made the reading thing, okay? All right, cool. So does it make sense? All right. So I want to say a couple of things about classroom communication in general. So I sent this long announcement early in the week. I don't know if you saw it. Was talking about green policy and what to do and those kind of things. So I'm gonna let you read that. I just want to say a couple of things about late assignments and mostly kind of how to kind of classroom interaction. So you see those, there are really three things. There's assignment. There's and this is really not that different from. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Friday afternoon. There's not so many, there's assignments, there's mock-ups, there's assignment, there's exercises, and there's discussions, right? So the way I work in the classroom is most of my feedback is about assignments, I always give you feedback about assignments, especially the first week. It's usually written or an audio, depending on the situation. But in any case, that's definitely where most of my feedback comes from there, discussions are very open, and there's really no right or wrong. The sense of discussion is for you to start thinking the material. Sometimes some of the I might contribute to the discussion if something interesting being said. I read everything, of course, in the course, but I don't always chime in, depending on the situation. It's more like for you a space to have discussion with your peers and think about music. If there are questions in the discussion that we need an answer, I usually address them in the live class, right? So for example, we talk about an analysis of a piece or something like that, we usually address that. But in any case, and so that my participation to the discussion is occasional, when it comes to exercises, I also check all of that stuff, of course, but I will always be commenting when and if necessary, right? So if you don't hear any feedback from me about your assignment, your exercise, means that it's fine, If there are things that need to be addressed, I'll let you know. Or if you have questions in that, I will be basically addressing that too. So in any case, it's just more like a general thing, just to explain how I interact with people. I check the course website probably 3-4 times a week, so every other day. So if you have any questions about the material or things, it's probably best for you to, if it's time sensitive, it's probably best for you to send me an audio, send me a message. Sorry, I'm kind of over blah, blah, blah here. Send me like a kind of a message, a private message. Those come to me in my email. I get notified. I see them right away. Just give me 24 hours to get back to you, but usually I get back to you if it's like something that is pressing. If it's not pressing, you can start a conversation, and that I will see it next I open the course. conversation also good for, sharing resources or whatever else that you want to do, but it's more like a space for you to share with everybody else, right? But I mean, if it's time sensitive, the best way to reach out to me is private messages. And in general, I would say the following: if it's about a delay in delivering your assignment, usually 1 day or 2 days maximum, that's never a problem. All right, so you can assume that if you have a 1 day delay or 2 days delay, send me a message so that I know, and then I will write you back to say, cool, okay, that's great, that's fine. But if I don't, I would not want to, because sometimes, sometimes people write me like, Saturday afternoon at I don't know, like 5 p.m. or Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. say I have an extension because my pipe broke in the house. I mean, that's of course is fine. I mean, you don't need to wait for me to have your approval. I mean, it's everything is completely fine. You know what I mean, in terms of like a slight delay. I would still want you to let me know, because if things start adding up, I can help you prioritize things, right? For instance, this is more important than the other thing, and we can talk about, in general, how to best address if the delays start to be kind of accumulating, But in general, you can assume that when you send me a message for a delay like that, that's fine, So I just don't want you to kind of see, oh, he hasn't replied, so I have to rush, and then you have a miserable hour between 11 p.m. and midnight because you tried to return your assignment on time when it was completely unnecessary, So that's kind of a general thing I want to mention, okay? So I think that's kind of everything for housekeeping items, Any questions on your end about general class, anything that comes to mind or you're curious about, or questions, or...
No, I mean, I have a question for later related to the first lesson, but I'm just waiting.
Okay. So, I mean, that's what I'm about to go. So, you want to ask your question?
Sure, I can ask it. It's related to the invented skills, and I wrote it in the exercise also, where
Oh, I haven't got, yeah.
where I thought I invented a skill, but it turns out it's just Phrygian with a raised seventh. And then I tried to experiment with different skills, but then I looked them up, and they all have a name that I'd never heard of. So I wasn't sure how unique the skill needs to be at this point.
Well, okay, so this is a great question. So, first of all, there's only 12 notes, right? And so, I mean, there are more, but I mean, in the Western canons, to speak, there's only 12 notes. So there's only that many combination of 7 notes out of the 12 that you can use. Doesn't have to be 7 anyway, but Messiaen knew that, right? So when we talk about Messiaen's mode next week, when he talks about modes of linear transposition, he was exactly pointed to that, right? So the idea is that, so in a way, it's statistically likely that, given the fact that American academia tends to overdo things, that somehow, somewhere, musicologists sat down and went through all the possible combination of scales and labeled them, right? Because that's probably been their doctoral dissertation. You know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but I mean, do you see what I mean? Like, the idea of the invented scale is not to reinvent the wheel, right? And this is a good thing, because it really goes to the core of the philosophy of the course in a way. It's just more like you have come up with a selection that you liked, and so that's what, and you're happy with that because it's something you can use for your note, right? So, there's no desire or need, and your grade will not be at all influenced by how cool or how original your skill is, right? The point here is to have you think a little bit outside. So here's the thing. Berkeley is a great place to be, right? And I've been at Berkeley for 10 years. I love everything about it. Well, not everything, most of it, But it's also a school with a very specific way to approach it, right? And so when we wrote these courses also, I wrote it in tandem with Marty, so we were really also wanted to show students something outside the Berkeley thing, right? And and in case you don't know, back in the day when Berkeley was starting to come up, they would just call if people wanted to market the school, they would just go to the Chord Factory, because the approach that Berkeley has about harmony and melody, it's very specific and it's very chordal based, right? So, and one of the things that it does, as you know, is things like the chord scale theory, right? So the codification of those elements are very specific, and they're very specific to that word, right? And so, one attempt that we were trying to do when we wrote this course was to try to break a little bit that mentality, and so in that sense to shy away from the traditional modes, right? Phrygian allegiance. So in a way, that's why this course is called New Scale, and we're gonna have new modes next week, which is kind of the same material, to be honest with you, but it just shows a little bit this idea to break that pattern, right? So invented scale is yet another way to do that, right? So it's just more like for you to think outside that codified knowledge and try to find pockets of different vocabulary that might be interesting to you. Does it make sense?
Yes, and
Yeah.
I felt that intention. I actually really enjoyed it. It was very creative and flexible. So just think of more ways of using it.
Yeah, it's funny because on the one hand, so this is like interesting because a lot of people think about this music that needs to be heavily codified and stuff like that. At the end of the day, especially when it comes to the first few weeks, I feel the approach can be seen as way freer than because there's no mode police. You know what I mean? It's really just more for you to try out. And I do spend time looking at pitches and scales, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, my assessment, my feedback is mostly related to bird's eye view, right? So I kind of alternate both ends. I think I do talk about from a structure and stuff like that in my feedback, but I also talk about notation more granularly, right? But those are the kind of the two things that I talk about. So in that sense, I really want you to think about this as a musical playground for you to explore, like a musical sandbox, if you want to try out to do different things from those guidelines, which are intentionally left a little bit loose for that reason. Does it make sense?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, so now let's talk a little bit. So let's just talk a little bit about this week more specifically, and let's maybe do a little bit of an overview, of the main topics, right? So this week and next week are kind of twin lessons in a way. So I'm going to repeat myself a little bit because lesson 1 is new scale, lesson 2 is new modes. Right? Now, first of all, if you have to kind of ask, and this is not a test, so you can say I don't know or I don't care or whatever, but if you were to try to think about what is the difference between new modes and scales, right? So what is the difference between mode and scales? What would you say? If you have to take a guess. There's no right answer, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think of it is the scales are really focusing on the intervals. The modes are kind of based in something that was present and then making shifts on previously provided scales.
Yeah.
So I feel like Lydian and Phrygian, they're like modifying slightly major or minor scales, for example. Also,
Interesting. So you're saying that basically modes are kind of expanded scales, to speak.
right.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So there really is no. I mean, this is one of the things that, going back to academia. I mean, I don't know, I came across kind of an anti-academic. I'm not really enjoying being in academia, but there was something that typically theorists would just argue over. What is the difference? I think in a way there's a lot of different. That's an interesting one because that allows you to do one thing, which is identify between major and minor modes, not just major and minor scale, but also like the Dorian, for instance, right? So the minor modes are a group and the major modes are a group, right? And so this is actually a cool concept because it does allow you to work in that direction. So that's a cool one. And I think another way, I don't know, I personally also think that it depends what scales are we talking about, and what modes are we talking about. If I think in major and minor scale versus mode, I think the other point is functionality, like functional harmony, right? In a scale, you do have very defined roles. You have a dominant, you have the tonic, you have the subdominant, those kind of things. With the modes, things get a little bit more blurred, and I think you use the word shifting, which I think it's a good way to think about modes, right? So you shift with modes, and with scale, you usually navigate them more on a more hierarchical way, right? So that's that. So the roles, there's a hierarchy, so to speak, in that, which I think is more more prominent. Anyway, so does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, all right. So the lesson spent. So okay. So having said that, I should say this. When it comes to modes, for instance, right? You'll see soon that we talk about scale, the octatonic scale today. And you see the Messiaen's mode number 3 actually, sorry, is actually an octatonic scale. So there's definitely like an overlap. And the way the Messiaen talks about the octatonic scale, it's really a mode, but also the octatonic scale itself is definitely not functional because there's no clear dominant and tonic, right? So you see what I mean? That there's definitely like gray areas, And I always talk about this. There's this wonderful book by a German writer called Thomas Mann. This book is called Dr. Faustus. I don't know if you read it. It's a pretty dense book, but there's a page where there are a point when he talks about music. It's basically like a fake biography of a composer inspired by Schoenberg, but we don't have to go to that. But the part that's interesting here is this idea that, to the point there's a data, then they said, there's a quote that I always love, which is when it talks about music, right? It's two characters talking, and one it says, music is contradiction, not there for us to mock it, to mock music, but to love it, in a way, just to show the richness and openness of it, So I think in a similar way, I would say that we should look at those definition, those gray areas of the definitions, not as ways to just, criticize its theoretical imperfections, but more like to appreciate the richness of it, if that makes sense, So, all right, cool. So having said that, the lesson really does spend not so long. I mean, I also very much aware of the Western lesson are way shorter than the theory and comp classes, but in any case, the lesson identify a first group of scales that you can use, and so for this week, the goal of this is to really for you to use some of these scales to compose a piece of music. You will be not forcefully, but by design, so to speak, probably varying music that is non-tonal, right? So not dealing with major or minor scale. And also, you will be asked to write for a melodic instrument. So that means concretely that you will be writing without harmony, just a melody, right? So flute, clarinet, whatever is your instrument. And it's also, you will not be dealing with tonal idioms, right? So that means that my suggestion to you is to really try to think about what else we use in music to express an intention beside pitch, right? So dynamics, articulations, the same thing screamed or whispered, it's a very different thing, right? And that's kind of the angle of this. Let me just move a little bit closer here because the sun is coming back here. I'm sweating like crazy. All right. Just 1 second, sorry. All right. And so in a way, this is kind of the spirit of this of this week. And so the lesson spent some time talking about the whole tone scale. And I think if you have been through the theory and comp 4, this is going to be stuff that, in terms of theory, will be pretty easy for you. Whole tone scale means whole tones, right? So it's a 6-note scale that just basically goes through. And by definition, it's completely symmetrical. It's just really. It doesn't move, right? It's a scale that, for its quality, it doesn't allow you to have, tonality has a hierarchy because the intervals are different, right? So it's an asymmetrical scale, right? And so in a way, the whole tone scale by definition is much more democratic. It's much more democratic, and so in a way it doesn't distinguish between pitches. And so of course that means that most of the time when you compose, in a whole tone scale, you're dealing with stasis, like something that sits, right? It doesn't really move, right? And so you probably find yourself doing some recoloring, some rearrangement of things, so you're probably gonna find yourself doing different things, but you will be not having the possibility to deal with functionality. And so that's the main thing about this, right? So you're gonna be asking yourself, how can I write a melody that is interesting without that, right? So does it make sense?
Yeah,
All right.
I will say I noticed the emphasis on melody after I did the first exercise where I included a bit of harmony, so I tried to focus more on melody for the other.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, honestly, the exercises, I mean, those are not graded, right? So it's just more for you to try to start digesting those things, right? And they will be phased out. I mean, in fact, we have exercises in the first 2 or 3 classes, and then we kind of fade out. And I should say another thing, which is a side comment, but it would be absolutely fine for me if you were to decide to take some material from an exercise and develop that as the main part of your assignment, right? So that's absolutely fine, in the sense that if you say, I really like to work on this whole tone scale, I'm gonna reuse it for my assignment and expand it. I think that's a great way to do it. All right, cool. So in any case, the lesson really spends really thinking about three main ideas. Well, 4. One is the Holton scale, which is basically just all the steps equal. One is a pentatonic scale, which is basically 5-note scales that do not have usually 4th and 7, which is very common in traditional music, traditional harmony, traditional, so also non-Western, gamelan. There are a lot of non-Western music that use pentatonic scales, and so that's another thing that is actually very, very interesting, and the last bit, of course, is the octatonic scale, which is a scale that is basically, working this half whole step, and so this is just a way for you to navigate, sort of scales you might not be familiar with, So it's really nice to see you. Yeah. Have a good weekend. Sorry. A colleague of mine, I'm actually finding I'm at a different college right now because my kids are they're playing the orchestra, the youth orchestra in this class at Taft, and so I meet some friends of mine from other schools when I do this. But anyway, so the octatonic scale, of course, is whole half, right? That's kind of what it is, right? So it's just the idea of, if you want, you can think about those as 2 diminished chord juxtaposed, right? Diminished chord, there's only 3 of them, and so if you want, there are only 3 possible octatonic scales, because everything else would be a transposition, and then, of course, last bit, of course, is the invented scale, right? Which is basically just just come up with we already talked about it at the beginning of the semester, beginning of class. Sorry, I'm kind of very tired today, so I'm really not talking clearly. But it's just finding your own set of scales, and this is a fine piece by Barez, which is like kind of you can see there's definitely like a contour you can find in this piece. Da-da-da, so there's like recurring pitches, and in a way they outline this sort of a kind of quasi-invented scale that it's basically, because you repeat the pitches, which is an interesting part of this, right? So because you invent the scale, the melody starts probably is not familiar, but because you run over those pitches again and again, because you are establishing the scale as you compose, what was starts as unfamiliar becomes way more familiar by the end of it, because of course that's how your piece is composed, right? So in a way, it's interesting because no one really thinks about, if you write in tonality, if you write in tone music, no one really thinks about, I have to make sure that I mean, you do, but not so much, right? So there's not so much concerns about, I have to really make sure that my piece sounds in C major, right? Because it's not something that it's embedded in the material. It's very much in Western music, and also historically this notion has been changed. So it's interesting because when you do invented scale, you kind of find yourself trying to really establish that as well, right? So do you see my point? It's kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind. So in a way, working with non-traditional scale, requires you to be mindful of the perception of it as well, beside the composing, if it makes sense, But anyway, I don't know if it makes sense, but this is just kind of the gist of it. And as far as your assignment, so I think that's pretty much it, what I have for you today, right? So do all these different pitches, and try to experiment with them, try to play around with them, And for your assignment, I suggest to pick the one that you find for some reason more attracted to, more interesting to, And then for your assignment, again, this is like, I'm gonna read through this with you. Unless you have any question. Do you have any question, Lutfi?
No.
Okay. So, did I say it right, by the way, Lutfi?
Oh, yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, cool. I say the Italian way, but what origin is this name from?
It's Arabic. I'm from Syria.
Arabic?
Yeah.
You're Syrian? Okay, cool. Okay. All right, so, all right. That's pretty much it. So, using one of the skill discussed lesson, including you invented one, composed a 16-bar piece of music for solo instrument. This is an important thing for the class, so pay attention to phrase structure, dynamics, meter, rhythm, besides pitch, right? So pitch is one part of the equation, Now this old spiel about reading and player, I think it stands, but I understand if you mock-ups are fine, And by the way, for the early stuff, for the early assignments, I mean it's always fine, but if you are unfamiliar with handwriting notation, it might not be too bad for you to try to do some of that handwriting notation for the beginning, the first few assignments, because it's just one instrument, and I like that when you do handwriting, you're immediately more aware of what goes into a score and not, right? Dynamics, articulation, the software does a lot of things for you, to the point that you might not be even aware of stuff, and so it's a good thing for me to test and see where you are with that, I mean, computer notation is fine, but I wanted to mention that there would be a benefit for you to do handwriting for that reason, and I think, as far as the mock-up or the play, if you do hand notation, if you want to play something on the piano or your instrument, that's fine, But it's just something I want to mention, okay? And there you go. And then, of course, submit both the PDF and the audio. And when it comes to, my feedback, the first few weeks, my feedback will probably be a little bit shorter because just the melody. So there's not so much I can say about it. You know what I mean? I mean, there are always things, but I mean, I just wanted to mention that my feedback will become more and more involved and detailed as we move along in the course, of course, and the problematics gets more complex and those kind of things. One last thing I want to say about this: I usually have two ways to give feedback. One is a short text or an audio. Sometimes I feel the audio is better because it allows me to look into notation, and I can tell you, oh look, and also the tone comes across, which I think sometimes is nice, because I can say it's great, or I can say it's great. There are things that actually come across with the way I say things that hopefully will be clearer to you. So it depends how it goes, but usually the first week is mostly written feedback. Sometimes it gets more elaborate. I just do that, The last bit I want to say is that I very rarely do resubmit, but I do them when I feel that you're not addressing the main core or one of the main core of the lessons, right? So if your assignment is completely out of the blue, completely out of context, or there's something in the assignment that makes me unsure whether you have understood the topics of the week or not, I might ask you to submit for that. That'll be the only reason, and you have time to resubmit. Honestly, the resubmission, I mean, of course, do it earlier than later is better, but I mean, as long as it's in by the end of the class, I will grade it, So that's kind of what it is, All right, I think that's what I have for you today. Any more questions?
Yeah, one more. I have a question related to the assignment, because you just mentioned that is the assignment also predominantly focused on melody, or is it okay to include like many chords along with it?
That's a good question. So for the first 2 weeks, the suggestion for the assignment is to write a melodic instrument, which means just a single melodic line. If you pay attention to the examples that you saw, the Messiaen, Messiaen is also next week, but the Varese piece, right? So there's a lot of solo instrument pieces. So I know that I'm not talking you specifically, but I always, when I do this, I always keep in mind that some people are going to check this out later. So I'm aware of the fact that to some of you this will be make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, or unsure or unsafe, and that's fine. You know what I mean? That is kind of, I mean, it's not meant to be, but it's very much in the realms of possibility, and I think it's a good way for you to strengthen the your care, your attention to the craft of composing a melody, right? You know, and so to that's a very long answer to a simple question you made, but the short answer to the question is like yes. So try to avoid chords for now.
That's all.
Now, honestly, I mean, the first week I usually are more on the lenient side because sometimes people don't realize, but I tell them I'm gonna take this, but the first week is gonna be so. The second week will be a little bit more on okay, you have to kind of work on the melodic line, sort of thing. Then when we lesson 3, we start talking about 2 instruments, so it gets a little bit different, and so that at that point you can do you have more variety, but that's kind of what the work on a solo instrument would allow you to really focus on more strongly on some of the topics of the week that we are covering.
That feels
all right.
good. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Anything else?
No, thank you so much.
Right. I think this is great. Then I'm gonna call the day here, and I'm looking forward to see everybody's assignments. And if you have any questions, of course, let me know in the way I talked about, and I'll hopefully have a haircut by the next time we have a class. But anyway, nice to meet you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.